Seeing some of the comments on social media this week. I look out over this crowd. As a member of this community, I urge you all to understand that it takes all of us to repair this country. It takes our teachers helping to overhaul the history taught in classrooms. It takes our officers to help reform the systems in place that don't serve to protect us all. And our parents to prepare our children to be brave, and our youth to heed that lesson and stand up and to call out these injustices. There are common misconceptions that racism only affects specific people or only exists in certain places. And I'm here to tell you all and make it clear that racism transcends location, racism transcends financial stance, and it also transcends social status. I received a call last week from a friend of mine here in Medway. And as we talked, he confessed to me that it didn't really occur to him how much all of this was really affecting me. Because he said, I'm always such a strong man, and I'm a decorated member in the community. His words, not mine. And it was in that moment that I realized that even I wasn't doing my part, and I was failing all of you in my community. Race is an uncomfortable topic. As white people, it's uncomfortable for you. As black people, it's just as uncomfortable for us to talk about with you. But that can't prevent us from progress. We need to normalize these discussions. As a child growing up in a predominantly white community, I always did as much as I could to fit in. And oftentimes that meant masking my melanin. The first time I was called a racial slur, I was my son's age. I was walking into a local store with my father, and as I proceeded to enter the store, a classmate of mine jumped in front of me, called me a racial slur, and then proceeded to laugh about it with his father. I remember being confused because I didn't even know what that word meant at the time, and once I learned what it was, I questioned how my dad could remain so calm. We are taught to always take the high road. We are taught not to let bigots see us sweat and to always de-escalate situations. So how does a black man protect his integrity when his soul is consistently marred by the bias of such destructive social culture? I think about this often as I look at my own children. I think about how to protect them, who I'm protecting them from, and how I preserve their innocence in a world that is not historically structured to support the ground that they stand on. I think about what if Tamir Rice was my son. I saw a comment this week on Facebook that said, "Why don't you march somewhere else? Medway doesn't have a problem." A novelist, Robertson Davies, once said, "The eye sees only what the mind is prepared to comprehend." Woo! Do you truly believe we are exempt, or are you closed off to the possibility? Another story for you. My wife, Angelica, was here at a local establishment in Medway last year, having a conversation with a friend about race. They were privately discussing the age of sleepovers, and my wife expressed fears about not truly knowing who you're letting your child sleep over with, what their morals and values are, and that she was generally concerned as that time was approaching. As she was talking to her friend, a gentleman nearby in the establishment proceeded to tell her to shut the F up, and that she was what was wrong in this country, that she was playing the victim and she was raising victims, along with a few more choice words.
Yeah, to hell with him.
So I bring up that story for two reasons. One, the obvious that racial tension can happen everywhere, even here in Medway. The second is because another part of that story is another friend of ours just happened to be there and jumped up in Angelica's defense. Not only did he not stand by and allow this injustice to happen, but afterwards he told us that this was a life-changing moment for him. He was able to see firsthand how these situations do really happen. To me, loyalty is most proven and earned in times when the hero has nothing to gain and everything to lose. Your black friends need heroes. Your black friends need you to step outside of your comfort zone to show that these situations are not okay.
Yeah.
Your black friends need you to ask them how they are doing. And your black friends need to know that they are not in this alone. Racism isn't always burning crosses or nooses and blatantly in your face. It's only surface level, and it comes in many different forms and many different severities, but you better believe it's there. This country has been sick for some time now. America didn't really get better, we just made it look better. And sadly, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery are simply the latest to be recognized in a long strand of injustice. Your voices, my voice, our officers' voices, our elected officials' voices, and our collective action now is the remedy. Just because you welcome diversity doesn't make you inclusive. How are we making it acceptable to be black in America? What are we doing to make Medway not just a town, but our town? I ask that you open your eyes and unmute your voices, because a resident like myself, a father like myself, a coach like myself, and kids everywhere just like mine's livelihood depend on it. Our youth, our country, our humans require our help. Will you sit back and wait for the problem to fix itself? Or will you step up and be a hero?
Woo!
Thank you. With that, I would like to invite 8th grader Kennedy Ham and Medway High School sophomore Trinity Johnson to the stage.
Yeah! Woo!
Hi everyone, my name is Trinity Johnson. I'm a Medway sophomore.
Kennedy Ham, I'm a Medway 8th grader.
We're going to ask you all a series of questions, and you can raise your hand if it applies to you.
Look around after every question at the people's responses around you.
If you have seen racism, raise your hand.
If you've been on the receiving end of racism, raise your hand.
If you have been on the giving end of racism, raise your hand. Thank you for the honesty.
If you've seen racism happen in Medway, raise your hand.
Keep your hand up if you've stayed silent.
If you feel uneducated on racial inequality, raise your hand.
If you've tried to educate yourself on racial inequality, raise your hand.
If you have kids in the Medway school system, raise your hand.
If you have taken the time to teach your kids that racism is not tolerable, raise your hand.
This next question is for anyone who's a person of color and a parent.
If you feel your kid isn't safe growing up in Medway, raise your hand. Hello?
If you are a white parent and feel Medway is a safe place to raise your children, raise your hand.
If you feel your kid isn't safe growing up in Medway, raise your hand if you know what subtle racism is and or what a microaggression is.
Raise your hand if you're guilty of being subtly racist.
Raise your hand if you acknowledge that Medway needs to be much better to make the town feel like home for everyone in it.
Raise your hand if you think justice needs to be served for those affected by race-related police brutality.
Raise your hand if you are ready and willing to make Medway better.
You need to take the initiative and do the research because Black people are tired.
We have been telling you for years now, and you haven't listened. Now is the time to get educated and make Medway a more welcome, safe place for people of color.
Understanding the privileged people is simple.
But understanding is not enough. You need to use it to fight for equality. If you don't understand white privilege, here's a few simple examples.
I can walk around a store in a hoodie without being watched.
When I was 7 years old, I was followed by the store owner because she thought I would steal something.
I can talk back to a police officer and feel confident in my safety.
My family trembles in fear anytime we see a police officer drive by.
I learn about tons of... My teachers look like me, and every table in the cafeteria has multiple...
The only role model I am taught about in school is usually Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King Jr. I don't see any teachers in Medway that look like me.
Woo!
These are just a few ways I, as a white person, have more privilege than Trinity does. Now I'm going to give the whole stage to Trinity.
Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Trinity Johnson. I'm 15 years old, and I've lived in Medway for almost 4 years. I'd like to start by telling you a story. During my first year here, 7th grade, my friend had asked me to walk with her to a restaurant after school, where we would meet up with some of our other friends. Now, being the morbidly obese child I was at the time, I happily obliged. As we walked, I started to fall behind because it's quite hard to move a 12-year-old, 220-pound body quickly. My friend noticed this, and instead of slowing down, she told me these exact words. "Hurry up, you fat nigger."
Oh.
Yes, with a hard ER, because that matters for some reason. To the parents out there, I'm sorry your children had to hear that, but understand this. I was a child. And at 15 years old, I'd like to argue that I am still a child. I stopped for a second.
Woo!
I stopped for a second, then did as she said. Why didn't I tell her it wasn't okay and walk home? Why didn't I report her to my school? Because as a child, I wanted friends. I needed to be liked. I didn't want to be the angry Black girl. I would have rather gotten called a nigger than be lonely in this cliquey town. Now some of you may be questioning, who would say this to their friend? Heck, who would say this to anyone? Well, let me tell you something. As a young Black girl living here in Medway, that wasn't the last time that word was used directly towards me. As a young Black girl living in America, I am forced to see the mistreatment and complete disrespect of my people all the time. Something my family has been discussing is the fact that Black people are treated as less than human. Even though the 3/5 Compromise was eradicated in 1865, it's clear that its legacy still lives today. In 2014, a man, Desmond Hagu, the CEO of Centerplate, a food and beverage service company, was recorded in an elevator for 46 seconds kicking a puppy. Horrifying, right? As soon as that video surfaced and was given to the police, Desmond was charged for abuse and soon after was put on probation, given 1,000 hours of community service to fulfill, and had to donate $100,000 of his own money to an animal charity. Serves him right. We all say that because as people, we agree that abuse towards animals is wrong and deserves to be justified. But Black people don't even get that same courtesy. Philando Castile was recorded being shot 7 times at close range in front of his girlfriend and his 4-year-old daughter. he died 20 minutes later. After many protests and riots, his killer, Geronimo Yanez, was tried for second-degree murder. But none of that mattered because the final verdict was that he wasn't guilty. Think about that for a second. A man is recorded kicking a dog and is immediately fired, charged, and penalized. But an officer is recorded shooting a black man 7 times in front of his family unjustly and still walks today scot-free. Right. Here in America, animal rights are not argued upon, yet black people's rights are treated as if they are opinions. This needs to change.
Woo!
But we need to start here at home. Medway needs to change. I don't have enough time in this speech to tell you how many times I've been called the N-word, have had it said purposely to provoke me, and of course your good old racism, microaggressions, and macroaggressions, where I've been told by my peers that they just don't like black people. Out of all of those, I've maybe reported 10 of those people, but it gets tiring when it's a suspension here, a detention there, and it keeps happening because it's tolerated.
Woo!
Medway needs to do better. The amount of anonymous Instagram accounts followed by my peers saying things like, kill niggers, blacks should die, it's ridiculous. Medway needs to do better. The amount of subtly and blatantly racist backlash I've seen on Friends of Medway for having this very march. Medway needs to do better.
Woo!
The fact that racism in town is an everyday dinner topic for my family. The fact that even though she loves the houses here, my mom wouldn't move here because she fears that my little sister will have to go through the same thing I do. So Medway, let's do better. Let's stop being silent, tolerable, and ignorant. Parents, start teaching your kids to be allies. And if you don't know how to be an ally, research it. This is not an invitation to bombard your closest black person with questions, because black people have been trying to teach you for years and we are tired. But I will say the general concept is quite simple. Defend our human rights and be a decent human being. Seeing all of you here now, even some who have been racist, I hope you are here because you want to change. You want to make changes, and because you acknowledge that black people are treated terribly due to the color of our skin. Taking the steps necessary and working hard towards a better town for black people, therefore making it a better town for all people, will bring this town true Mustang pride. Thank you.